The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. That's Marcel Proust. And I think that quote really captures what we're trying to do today.
Absolutely. It's about perspective, isn't it?
It is. Because, so often we see these huge global events kind of from orbit, just headlines and politics.
Right, the big picture.
But underneath all that, there's always this profound human story, a societal impact that often gets missed.
Yeah, the stuff on the ground.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into that very thing, the hidden sort of multifaceted consequences of the war in Ukraine, but specifically on Russia itself.
Okay.
Our main source here is a really striking recent article from The Guardian. It's titled, Russia's War Toll, Deaths, Disabilities, and Economic Impact.
A very direct title.
It is. And our mission really is to unpack the layers in that piece. We're talking economic signs, demographic shifts, even, really personal stories.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does. And this kind of deep dive, this critical analysis, it's just so important for anyone trying to understand, complex current affairs, whether you're maybe studying for competitive exams like the UPSC.
Ah, yes, where nuance is absolutely key.
Precisely. Or even if you just want to be a properly informed person about what's happening in the world.
Exactly. And like you said, we're aiming to go beyond just the headline casualty numbers. We want to explore the so what question for Russian society, for its future.
Right.
What's fascinating, I think, is how the data, even when the official lines try to hide it, kind of leaks out in other ways.
Leaks out how?
Well, through things like economic activity, personal accounts. It paints this picture of the real toll the conflict is taking deep inside the country. We'll try and connect those dots for you.
Okay, let's get into it then. We actually start not with, say, a general or politician, but with a funeral director.
Interesting entry point.
Yeah, his name's Nikolai. He's in Ufa, Bashkortostan.
Yeah.
And he talks about his business. He saw this huge boom during COVID, had to hire extra people.
Right. That was a grim time everywhere.
Then things dipped a bit as the pandemic eased. But he says that quiet period didn't last long. For the last, 2.5 years now, business is way up again.
And the reason.
Tragically, Russia's casualties in Ukraine.
Wow. That's stark.
It is. And he shared this really poignant detail, too. He said sometimes he checks the name of the person they're burying.
Oh, no.
And he realizes it's someone he knew. A schoolmate, maybe an acquaintance.
God, that makes it incredibly personal, not just business.
Exactly. And maybe telling, too, he asked The Guardian not to use his last name. He's worried about government reprisal.
That says a lot, doesn't it? About the climate for talking about this openly.
It really does. It highlights this hidden dimension.
And this personal story from Nikolai, as grim as it is, it ties right into the bigger economic picture the article lays out.
How so?
Well, Russia's official statistics agency, Rosstat, they reported that just between January and April 2025, funeral businesses across Russia earned nearly 40 billion rubles.
40 billion rubles. What's that in, say, pounds?
About 380 million pounds sterling. And crucially, that's a 12.7% increase compared to the same time last year.
So a significant jump.
A very significant jump. It's this kind of tangible, if really bleak, economic echo of the human cost. It shows how everyday business numbers can actually reveal these massive hidden trends.
A grim indicator, but an indicator nonetheless.
Exactly. It's a key piece of the puzzle for understanding what's really going on inside Russia.
Okay, so we have these indirect economic signs. But what about the actual casualty numbers? You mentioned official secrecy.
Right, yeah, Russia treats its military casualties as a closely guarded state secret, so getting official figures is basically impossible.
So how does the article build its picture then? Where do the numbers come from?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. The piece pulls together estimates from several different independent sources to try and give a fuller view.
Okay, like who?
For example, the British Ministry of Defense. Their estimate is quite high. Over 1 million Russian troops killed or injured since February 2022.
1 million. Killed or injured. That's enormous.
It is, and it sort of aligns with the study from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, based in the U.S. They put Russian military deaths at up to 250,000.
Okay, deaths specifically.
Yes, and then total casualties, including wounded, over 950,000. So in the same ballpark as the UK estimate, really.
Right. Any Russian sources trying to track this?
There are. The article mentions the independent Russian outlet Mediazona. They do incredibly meticulous work.
How do they do it?
They track things like official records where possible, social media obituaries, even photos of gravestones. Through that, they've managed to identify by name over 111,000 Russian military personnel killed.
By name. That's incredible work.
It really is. And they themselves believe the actual death toll is significantly higher than what they can confirm by name.
So multiple sources pointing to staggering losses. How do these numbers compare historically for Russia?
That's a really crucial point the article makes, putting it in context.
Yeah, because context is everything with numbers like these.
Absolutely. The estimate is that in just over 3 years, Russian fatalities are already potentially 5 times higher than the combined total from all Soviet and Russian wars fought between the end of World War II and 2022.
5 times. All other post-WWII wars combined.
That's the estimate. Think about that. Specific examples. Roughly 15 times the losses from the Soviet Union's entire decade-long war in Afghanistan.
15 times Afghanistan.
And maybe 10 times higher than the losses in Russia's 13-year war in Chechnya.
Wow. So this isn't just another conflict in terms of human cost.
Not even close. These comparisons really hammer home the scale. It's not just a war, it's like a demographic shockwave hitting the country far beyond anything in recent memory. Understanding that scale is key.
It really is. And of course, it's not just about those who've died. What does the article say about the injured, the long-term impact of disability?
Right, that's another huge, often less visible part of the toll. The article points to a massive surge in demand for prosthetic limbs.
Okay. Is there data on that?
Yes, quite specific data. There's a quote from Igor Vinogradov. He runs a prosthetics firm in northern Russia. He says his company, quote, doubled the number of our clients 1 year into the conflict.
Doubled in a year.
And since then, he's seen a steady 10% increase every year, and he explicitly states, by far, the majority are war veterans.
Where are they getting parts?
Interestingly, he mentions relying on German imports, but also developing some homegrown Russian technology to cope with the demand.
And does the government data back this up?
It does. Russia's own labor ministry figures show that state funding for prosthetic limbs jumped 53% in 2024 compared to 2023.
53% in 1 year.
Yeah, the numbers went from about 99,000 limbs subsidized in 2023 to over 152,000 in 2024, and 2023 was already way up from 2022's figure of around 65,000.
So the trend is sharply upwards.
Sharply. As one Moscow prosthetics maker put it in the article, very bluntly, the market has exploded.
The market has exploded. That phrase again, it's chilling when you think what it represents in human terms.
It really is.
So what does this imply long term? This huge rise in disabilities must put a massive strain on society, on healthcare.
Oh, undoubtedly. The article suggests this surge in severe injuries, amputations, it's going to burden Russia's public services, its economy, for decades. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of veterans needing lifelong care, rehab, support.
And this is happening against the backdrop of existing problems.
Exactly. It just pours fuel on Russia's existing demographic fire. The country already had a deepening demographic crisis before the war.
Right. Low birth rates, emigration.
Precisely. Tens of thousands of young, often educated Russians have left the country since the invasion started. Plus, you had the huge hit from the COVID pandemic, over 1 million excess deaths in Russia.
So the war is hitting a population already under strain.
Terribly so. It's taking out a huge number of young men, the very people needed for the workforce and, for future families.
And adding to the concern, the data itself is becoming harder to get, isn't it? The article mentions life expectancy.
Yes, there's an independent demographer, Alexander Raksha. He estimates that average life expectancy for Russian men has already dropped.
Dropped by how much?
From about 68 years old before the full-scale invasion to around 66 now. A 2-year drop is significant.
That is significant.
But here's the kicker. Raksha also points out that from 2024 onwards, Russia actually stopped publishing all mortality and life expectancy data specifically for its male population.
Stopped publishing it altogether.
Completely, for men.
Wow. What does that tell you when a government just stops releasing data like that?
Well, it strongly suggests they're trying to hide the true scale of the problem, doesn't it? It makes it much harder for anyone inside or outside Russia to track the real impact.
Control the narrative.
Exactly. It points to a desire to manage perceptions, both at home and internationally. You have to ask, what are they trying to conceal?
It's a classic move, unfortunately. Now, thinking about that narrative control, many people, especially anti-war activists early on, thought that as the coffins returned, public opinion would turn against the war.
Yes, that was a common expectation. that the sheer human cost would fuel protests.
But the article suggests that hasn't really happened on a mass scale. Why not? What's the Kremlin doing?
Well, according to the source, the Kremlin has run a very effective, quote, expansive propaganda campaign.
How does that work in practice?
A key part is framing fallen soldiers as heroes, martyrs for the nation. And President Putin himself has pushed this narrative very hard.
In what way?
He's repeatedly suggested that dying on the front line is somehow more meaningful than, say, dying from alcoholism or a car crash back home in some impoverished town.
Is there a specific example of that?
Yes, the article quotes him speaking to a grieving mother back in late 2022. He said something like, "Some people die in road accidents, others from alcohol. When they die, it's unclear how. But your son lived, do you understand? He fulfilled his purpose."
Wow, that's quite a message to a grieving mother.
It is. And perhaps surprisingly, the article finds that instead of widespread anger, many families who've lost someone are actually urging the government to push harder.
Really? Why would that be?
The feeling seems to be that their sacrifice, their son's death, must be justified. It can't have been for nothing. So they need Russia to win to see it through.
Is there an example of that perspective?
Yeah, the article mentions a man named Dmitry Shkrebets. His son, Yegor, died on the cruiser Moskva.
Ah, the flagship that sank.
That's the one. Now, Shkrebets runs a blog, and he's apparently urging intensified attacks on Ukraine. He wrote, "Any compromise with Ukraine would be a betrayal of the country, a betrayal of the blood our sons have shed, and we need to see this through to the end."
So the loss fuels a demand for victory, not peace.
In some cases, yes. It shows how effectively that narrative can take hold.
And it's not just narrative, is it? There's a financial angle, too. The article mentions compensation.
Oh, yes, a huge financial angle. The Kremlin is reportedly offering very generous payouts to the families of soldiers killed or wounded.
How generous are we talking?
A study by the Russia think tank, cited in the piece, estimated that in 2024 alone, the government budgeted at least 1.2 trillion rubles for this compensation.
1.2 trillion. What's that in dollars?
About 15.3 billion US dollars, just for 1 year's compensation payouts.
That's an enormous sum. That must have social effects, too.
Absolutely. The article notes the rise of online groups, for instance, on VKontakte, which is like Russia's Facebook.
What happens in these groups?
Relatives share advice on navigating the bureaucracy to get these death benefits, but they also vent frustrations, especially about disputes over who gets the money.
Disputes? Like what?
Well, the article gives a really telling example post. Someone wrote, "My husband signed the contract a few days before we got married. He died shortly after. Now his children from a previous marriage are suing me to take away the death payouts. Please help."
Wow. So these massive payouts are creating entirely new kinds of social friction and legal battles within families.
Exactly. It reveals this whole other layer of societal impact, driven by the sheer amount of money flowing into bereaved or injured families.
It seems like this combination, then the powerful propaganda and these significant financial incentives, is key to understanding how public support, or at least acceptance, is maintained.
I think that's precisely the analysis. It's a potent mix. It valorizes the sacrifice, makes it heroic, and it also provides a substantial financial cushion or even windfall for families who might otherwise be destitute.
Making it harder to question the war itself.
Much harder. For some, it seems to reinforce their commitment, justifying the loss.
So with all these losses, the demographic hits, the question becomes, how does Moscow keep finding people? How do they replenish the ranks?
That's the million-ruble question, isn't it? Or maybe the 2 million ruble question now.
Why 2 million?
Because, according to the article, military recruitment is actually surging in many parts of Russia, and the signing bonuses being offered have hit record highs, sometimes up to 2 million rubles.
2 million rubles.
That's roughly.
About 25,000 US dollars. That's a life-changing amount of money in many parts of Russia.
A huge incentive. Is there data on how many are signing up?
There are estimates. The article cites Jonas Kluge, a researcher at a German think tank. By analyzing federal spending patterns on these bonuses, he estimates that Russia recruited about 89,600 men just between January and March 2025.
Almost 90,000 in 3 months.
Yes. And that figure represents a 22% increase compared to the same period the previous year.
So recruitment is actually increasing, despite everything we've discussed.
It appears so, yes. Driven largely by these massive financial incentives, it seems Moscow is, for now at least, able to keep feeding manpower into the war effort. It's just the scale of investment, both in money and propaganda, to keep this going is immense.
Truly immense. It underscores the Kremlin's commitment to pursuing the conflict, regardless of the internal costs we've been discussing.
Which brings us back, full circle, to Nikolai, the funeral director in Ufa.
Right. How did the article leave him?
Well, he's watching the peace talks, like everyone else, wondering what it means for his grim business. He says, quite simply, "Of course, I hope this ends soon and the deaths stop."
A very human sentiment.
Absolutely. But he also noted his disappointment that the talks seem stalled. And then he added this final thought: "It just feels wrong to be making money off young guys dying."
That says it all, really.
It does. So, stepping back, what this deep dive into the Guardian's reporting shows us is a Russia really wrestling with deep, complex internal consequences from this war.
Absolutely. We've seen the staggering human toll, reflected not just in casualty estimates, but in those grim booms in the funeral and prosthetics industries. We've seen the demographic strain, made worse by emigration, and hidden by deliberate data suppression.
Yeah, and the narrative control.
And underpinning it all, yes, a very sophisticated government effort using propaganda and massive financial payouts to manage the narrative and incentivize participation, even among those who've suffered the most direct losses. It's a nation being fundamentally altered.
It really is. We've tried to peel back some of those layers today, looking at what's often unseen beneath the headlines. Which leaves me with a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder.
Okay.
Considering this unprecedented scale of human and economic cost inside Russia, what might be the really long-term, maybe even unforeseen changes brewing within that country's social fabric, its politics, that perhaps we haven't fully grasped yet?
That's a crucial question.
It is. Especially, as we said, if you're studying these global events closely, maybe for exams like UPSC, understanding these potential deeper shifts is vital.
Definitely something to keep watching.
So we hope this deep dive has given you some new perspectives, some new eyes, perhaps, on this critical global situation. If you found our discussion valuable today, please do like this deep dive.
And subscribe to our channel for more critical discussions like this one.
Yes, and please leave your comments below. Any further questions you have or your own observations on the topic, we'd love to hear them. Your engagement really helps us keep doing these deep dives for you.